Hi, my name is James Hughes, and I would like to welcome you to the Curating a Neglected Revit Family Library presentation. ATG is a platinum level Autodesk software provider, and a platinum partner is someone who has the best customer service, the best technical support, and best customer retention across authorized resellers. I would like to tell you just a little bit about myself. I'm a licensed architect in the state of Arkansas. I have 13 years of architectural experience. And for 6 years, I've been an AEC industry specialist with ATG. So my full-time job is helping other architects, interior designers, landscape architects, engineers, and even contractors with Autodesk software, as well as a number of other technical services. One of the services that I have to advise and dig in to help with is with family curation. Sadly, there are very few firms who have an organized Revit library where users can find families, details, schedules, or views with ease. And since they can't find them in the template and they can't find them in an organized database, guess where they go? No, really, you would have to guess where they go because you don't know. And unless you poll them and determine what their adaptive habits are, like I do, then you wouldn't know. So I would like to share some of those results and help you guys get started on the path of creating a highly efficient Revit family database. In addition to my years of experience helping firms with organizing their content, I've also spent the past few months further researching it and have written a comprehensive white paper on this subject. This white paper is a soup to nuts approach to the process, complete with an order of operations, as well as a review of multiple approaches and software solutions that can help automate each part of the process. The white paper is titled How to Unshamble Your Revit Library, and it will be available on ATG's website somewhere around March 3rd, 2021. This webinar is intended to be a primer to that paper. It'll be an informal discussion of the first chapters at the beginning of that process. So today we'll talk about the problem. We'll talk about leadership's role in solving the problem, how to build a Revit library, or if you haven't started, if you don't already have content, how to start or improve your QA/QC process, or as some people I talk to say, what does that mean? We'll also talk about different strategies for harvesting families. And lastly, we'll talk about how to organize Revit system files, which is kind of a different scenario than the other families that are mentioned in that step prior to that. My main objective is just to give you guys a primer to this process. There are a lot of hangups to the process. I want to talk through those. There are a lot of misconceptions, particularly by leadership, as far as who should do what. And there's a lot of misconceptions among BIM managers or people who are very good in BIM as to what they can do during company time without being a nuisance about the subject. I want to give you guys ammunition so that you've got the information, the game plan, and hopefully you can point your firm's leadership to this video content, particularly the leadership's role portion of this. All right, so let's talk about the problem. I forgot I had this slide on here. There's Ross entering Rebecca Romaine Stamos's apartment where he was trying to overlook the fact that she is ensconced in squalor. There are some firms who are in this category, and in this case, the new person to the firm is Ross in this scenario. As I mentioned, unfortunately, I mean really unfortunately, in the people that I am talking to, which is kind of just a general swath of architects, only about 10% of those firms are not embarrassed by the state of their Revit family organization. And they tend to be larger firms in that 10%, 10th percentile that have taken a very organized approach, and they have it published in their BIM documentation, and work continues in an orderly fashion to build and to curate their library. There's some firms that aren't embarrassed because they just haven't thought about it. They're just putting things wherever they want and they have no shame. But the 10% of firms, what I mean by that is 9 out of 10 times, if I am speaking to owners in your firm and maybe some of your Revit Jedi or your power users, and I ask just a simple question: what are you guys doing to organize and distribute your content? Usually 9 out of 10 times I get a very nervous laugh, kind of an embarrassed laugh. And basically there are different reasons for why we're not doing enough. But normally they will cop to the fact that there is no system in place. Less than half the time there are no standards, but what I mean by that is not BIM standards, but I mean standards as far as a standard practice for reviewing content before it goes into projects, reviewing content before it goes into a database, and then performing QA/QC process. That's what I mean by no standards, because there's basically a whole other level of paying attention to quality, other than simply which folder do I put things in. Oftentimes, your power users inherited the mess. The layout system, the folder structure on the network was put in place by someone else, or someone else opened up a folder to have read-write access, and you've got lots of users jumping in, taking content, updating and changing parameters, over saving original content, and now you don't know which one is the quality product and which one's the experiment or the old broken one. So oftentimes you can inherit a mess that is a continued mess where other people keep jumping in and making changes to it without any system in place. This leads eventually to private stashes. So in larger firms, if things are in shambles, like this apartment Ross is walking into, what Ross is going to do as the new person is to keep their own private stash of, it's basically a small curation experiment. I know these things are quality things that I use a lot, so let me just keep them off to the side in this external hard drive, and really only I know about it. And so there obviously is inefficiencies in not sharing, or the firm not knowing that there is quality content to solve a problem. They're going to keep looking around in old projects or lots of other terrible places to go look for content and burn up. As you can see, the next point is 8.2 hours a week average wasted. This is the big eye opener. And I arrived at that number from a recent business process assessment that I performed, where I sat down with the design team for a multidiscipline architectural engineering firm and asked each user, when things aren't in the template file and you have to go to other sources, where do you go? One of the other questions I asked them is, on a weekly basis, how many hours of that week do you spend going out to procure content? And the average was 8.2, which means I had much higher numbers. I think up to 14 hours was the high end. And then you've got some people that are really great at finding content that would clock in more like 4 hours or half a day out of their week. But then you've also got your best and brightest Revit users are burning up a lot of their time trying to help other people find content. Your PMs are burning up their time trying to remember and find older projects to point people to. So this is an enormous number. 8.2 out of 40 hours a week are spent with this. You're looking at about 20% of your billable time is in this funnel. And so what that means is, if this part of what you do is inefficient really at all, it's going to have a tremendous impact to your overall firm's efficiency. This is the part we tend to look away from, and we just say, well, it's inherently messy. But as they call her in Friends, dirty girl doesn't have to live like this. She could be living the Monica lifestyle. It's not the cost of doing business. Here's the biggest problem, and I've saved it for last. This is the reason efforts hang up, is because the organization of the files would be unbillable overhead. And that may not be true, but I promise you, almost to a person, that's what your best Revit users believe, that I can't spend 8 hours, 4 hours a week solving this mess, because if I do, someone's going to look at my timesheets and there's going to be a problem because I was spending this time as unbillable overhead. never mind the fact that the work that I accomplished in that time would have saved us a tremendous amount of lost effort by every Revit user in the entire firm. So that's the problem. There's more problems, but those are the ones that, that we highlight the most. All right. Leadership is covering Ross's eyes there in this scenario. Look at his hands. You can tell he knows he's still surrounded by a mess, though. He's not relaxed. He's not into this. Here's an issue too. There's no literature on the topic of what leadership should be doing about this mess. It basically, if you research this, as I recently have, you're going to find processes and you're going to find software solutions, but you're not going to find a real investigation of the problem. That's one of the reasons I think the white paper could help you guys out, is being able to articulate that and be able to phrase that in terms of lost ROI. The other thing that there isn't is a clear direction from what's needed from leadership so that they can have a successful implementation. One of the key things that leadership can do is to provide the right resources. That can be hours, that can be the right people, that can be a structure, that can actually be expectations. You can actually structure your expectations with deliverable deadlines, but you kind of need to make sure that people have not only the blessing, but the expectation of success with measurable deliverables, which we'll talk about in a second here. So this fails in more than 90% of the cases. The reason that that we fail is the thought is we'll just have our Revit Jedi, and that's a terrible term. You know, sometimes people say Revit guru, someone who's really good at Revit, who builds families and sort of saves the day. We tend to think, well, this person saves the day all the time, and that person usually will take it on. About 2 out of 3 times, they will look around and say, well, if not me, nobody. It has to be me. And so they make it a pet project. It's something that they do after hours, and it's fairly a thankless job, and it fails over time. It either fails immediately once that person realizes the enormity of the database that they would need to wrangle and curate, or it fails if they're following a process. It will peter out between 3 to 6 months of sort of intermittent work in that process, because again, they've only got so many hours after hours to be able to carve for this. And even with COVID, you would think, well, there's a lot of people sitting around that could probably, you know, do this type of work, or we could have an intern do this. That's a terrible plan, and you should stop thinking like that. This, as I'm going to show you, is a serious problem that requires the best efforts of your best Revit minds, and it needs to be treated as a project. You can see that I kind of jumped ahead here, but first you need to understand the cost of this to your firm. That's one of the things that the white paper is going to help dive into, so that you can put together, even if it's soft numbers, try to get a handle on what the cost is per user and per project to the firm, so that you can start to figure out how big of a deal this is for your firm. Once you do that, you won't even have to sharpen your pencil and get really accurate numbers before you realize it is a gross problem. And so at that point, what you should pivot to do is to treat it as a prioritized project. Architects know how to deliver on time and in budget if they're operating within a project structure. If it's a pet project, that's different. If it's after hours, that's different. If it's after this project, I'll get around to it, that's not the same thing. This is a prioritized project, not because of the big deal that this customer is to our firm, or the big dollars that this project brings into the firm. This project is prioritized because it is big dollars that are right now flying out of the window of the firm, and we got to shut the window. When you structure that as leadership, you need to demand measurable deliverables on a deadline. You can have your team tell you what they think is possible with with the help of software and with a measured approach over time as a phased approach, and let them inform what that deliverable is. but it needs to be measurable. You need to be able to log in and actually see that the work has been added or improved according to what was said would be done by the deadline that was agreed upon. And if so, then you can actually go above and beyond that with benefits. And we'll talk a minute or two later about some ways to possibly incentivize the growth of a highly curated uh, library. So if you don't have Revit content, if you're new to Revit, it's been out for 20 years, but man, I talk to a lot of firms that are new to Revit. They don't have much content. You have to start by building a library first. There's nothing to organize until you've built something. There's a lot of firms that have been in Revit for a very long time. They don't have a library. They either have a few things squirreled away in their own private stash, but they don't go to a centralized source that their firm has put together over the 21 years that Revit has been in our industry. You guys probably have, if you're like most firms, about 20 years worth of AutoCAD content. I have seen firms have a pretty successful schedule of transitioning old DWG drafting details into drafting views in Revit, and then converting that line work over to be detail components so that you get the added strength. I don't need to talk you into it, but you need to have a phased approach of bringing your CAD content forward as Revit assets and build that into your library. One other point I want to bring up is that curated libraries acquire content much faster. If it's not just a pile or a few folders and everything just kind of goes wherever you want to, make a new folder, toss some things in there. If you have an organization to it, if content is being tested and then sort of a stamp of approval and people then make it available to you, you would be surprised how quickly those libraries grow, how willing users are to want to contribute to that. So it can actually help you to grow your library faster than you would think would happen. So the way that almost every library is built in our industry is that you have, and I'm using Jedi for shorthand here. What I mean is someone who's nifty in Revit. So typically your Jedi will save out an RFA file. So if they're doing some work, they're either customizing a piece of content that was close, but they're making something either for themselves or for another user. Whenever they do that, they tend to, from the family editor, save out those RFA files. They'll either put it on their own drive and use it for themselves. They might put it on a network location that people have trouble finding and it isn't really curated. But there are actually problems with that workflow if there's no QA/QC, because that person's a Jedi. They tend to be the last set of eyes that looks at it. They tend to, say, well, here it is. It's ready to go. I've made it. And they tend to not have a QA/QC process. There's probably a 2 out of 3 chance that they're not having a second set of eyes looking at that content. And they need to change their ways. They need a peer-reviewed QA/QC process to improve, yes, even the quality of what they created to meet a project requirement, so that it has things like shared parameters that family might need down the road to be scheduled well, to be tagged well. It might need some more parameters for information control. It might need to be more parametric so that you have better flexibility. They didn't create just something monolithic that's not meant to be altered later. There's even QA/QC process that goes beyond a standard of care that most firms have. You might frequently have things that when you shrink them down too much, they break, or if you move them whatsoever, they break. You can, if you've got good families, you can make them better, and we'll detail some other ways to up your QA/QC expectations later. I included this picture of the firewood, not because it's a highly efficient database, but just because the act of curation itself is beautiful. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a piece of art like this. Just stacking firewood brings order to that situation. Blast us back to 2019 here. QA/QC. All right. So QA/QC stands for quality assurance / quality control. This term is something that pretty much every industry except for the AEC or the architect, engineer, contractor industry utilizes. I have to explain this term actually to lots of people. It's unfamiliar to us, but basically, if you just take the first part, QA, quality assurance, what that would look like for us in this situation is just simply having a different set of eyes peer review the families and the other work that you've done. Maybe your Revit projects as well need to be peer reviewed. That's what quality assurance is. You're just making sure that what you've done is quality. Typically, though, I mentioned that usually whenever someone creates a family, whenever a Jedi creates a family, they kind of cheat that system. So firms try to cheat this and have the same person who developed the family to check it. And I'm going to read to you guys just a little passage here from the white paper. This is like having the developer of a product perform their own market research by interviewing themselves. Sure, it's easier, but you'll end up with a compromised process, which is actually worse than a compromised product, which you also get. Instead, have a trusted partner go down a standards checklist that you all create to verify that all shared parameters were created for it, that the correct category was used, that the correct family type, like wall hosted, face based, or generic, was used. And you can grow the quality of your quality assurance plan north from those basic qualities. If you have good families, you can make them better. I sort of mentioned this just a couple of minutes ago. One thing that we do, so ATG also builds family for manufacturers, product manufacturers. I can't name drop, but a very large door manufacturer has recently had us do some work. And one of the things that we build into those families are some constraints with some if formulas. So if someone tries to, for instance, shrink that door to be too narrow, and it would cause either geometry to collide or for something to look goofy or protrude, we can control if they change that value to be less than something, then it will default instead to a different value. You don't see these much outside of manufacturers' content. And so I just wanted to kind of point out there's basically a whole other world of improving your families way higher than sort of the standard of care we're used to seeing. And you need to tune into that, and you need to start requiring it in your quality assurance plan. If you don't know what those things might be, you can automate this process. You could utilize something like CTC's family checker. This will actually open up a family, and in like 2 seconds, it will test and flex according to BIM objects, grading criteria, as well as some other high industry standard, really too high of industry standards. And you can then open it and it will generate an Excel check or a grade or a report for the check that it performed on the family. And it will report, 42, I think, things that it has checked and have some cell coloration. So it'll color a cell red and tell you something is basically a big problem. But you can go through a report like that and decide the things that you want to fix. And if it's like a lot of things that need to be fixed on it, you might actually just junk that file. But it will help you do triage, which is an important part to your QA/QC process, and starting to improve the files that you currently have, as well as the files that you will be harvesting as we go. Then, so we've only talked about quality assurance. Quality control ensures that quality changes are made in the deliberate execution of a plan. So that's actually the execution of fixing the quality. So if you start with like that CTC family checker, now you've started quality control. We're actually going to fix the things that are deficient in our quality assurance that we found by implementing a quality control plan. And this is a checklist. You run down the checklist, given a certain amount of hours per week or per quarter, however you guys phase that in. But it's not a let me open a family for 4 hours, find out what's wrong with it, and also fix 1 or 2 things in that, because that's kind of what you would be doing if you manually open a family and try to improve it. That it's a black hole, and that's kind of why your Revit Jedi know this. They know how long it takes to troubleshoot a problematic family find out if it's a geometry problem, a constraints problem, a parameter issue, a formula issue, and then try to resolve that. The fix normally is not that hard. It's the investigation and the testing that will sort of eat your lunch. So having something like a family checker to automate part of that process, and then just basically give you a checklist, get in here, set a reference plane, constrain the edge of this geometry to that so that it has an instance parameter that controls the length. I do those things, and in 10 minutes, I'm through with that family. So not 4 hours of investigating and trial and error with it. QA/QC, that's what it is. We need to start there too. Harvesting families. Ooh. How do we get content continuously pumped into our either a folder or into a content management solution or something to make it available to everybody? How do we get it out of their private stashes and make it to where everybody has access to it? The greatest thing that you can do, and it's our first point on here, is to make it part of your design checklist. Basically require it of your project managers. Whenever they are wrapping up a project that has, quote, left the office, they need to open up the Revit project, and they need to, at a minimum, determine the hero families, which I kind of mentioned here at the bottom. They need to determine the families that they had to go out and get or make or alter, and those ones that worked well for them. And at a minimum, they need to save those out for your Revit Jedi to kick the tires on, test, flex, and then make available to everybody. It would be better if they harvested everything out. And so there is a manual method that I've listed here. People kind of know this, but they don't really know it. Like, it's not part of their workflow. So if I quizzed someone who knew a lot about Revit, they might not actually realize that this would do this. But if you go to File, Save As, Library, and then Family, that leads you to a dialog box where if you leave it on the default setting, which is all families, you can see it in brackets there, it will literally strip out every family out of the Revit project that isn't a system family, and it will pump it into its own same named .rfa file. So if the name of that family in Revit is outside lantern, it would create outside lantern.rfa and pump it and 150 other families into that folder. You can utilize some freeware software that's able to deduplicate. And so if you have a lot of duplication of families that already exist in your content library, you can identify those with deduplication software, delete those files out, checking with a PM to make sure they didn't come up with a better version of it before you delete it. And then that leaves you with the unique files that you've stripped out that can be improved and then made available to your team. So it's a manual method, but I would recommend that you try to harvest everything out and basically require that as part of the PM's deliverable. There is another way to help automate this. CTC has a family exporter tool. It's kind of similar, except it gives you a couple of other bells and whistles. It's also a free tool as well. So you can get the BIM batch suite that it comes in, and this tool is going to remain free for you. But it allows you to basically name things as you go, to have it subfolder and put content into other subfolders as it goes. Probably one of the biggest things that it can do is add prefixes and suffixes. So if part of your QA/QC process is to just put a suffix for QA on the end of it, because you basically said, here's a file, but it hasn't gone through the QA process because it still has that QA suffix on the end. That's kind of a neat little bell or whistle that software can do for you. I mentioned that you could either have your PMs harvest all or just choose the hero families from that project. I have seen this foster a healthy competition. So you can, as a PM myself in years past, in this scenario, I would want to at least make sure that I've got 10 really awesome families from a project that I can save out, and the BIM manager sees me do that and knows that I am, adding to the firm's stable of what it's able to grow as its library. That makes me feel good. It has great optics. You can encourage that kind of friendly or healthy competition among PMs. Also, we've seen bounty systems be, it can be effective. It depends on the culture of your firm. But if you are able to produce a certain number of families per quarter, then here's a $25 Amazon gift card, or whatever you choose as a appropriate bounty system. So we need to make sure that we harvest families. Don't just look at the stack and the pile of families and views and schedules and things that you already have. That's a great place to start too, but we have to have a game plan for ongoing curation. And that's why we need to make sure that we are tackling our ongoing harvesting efforts. And that's why I've got a harvester shown here. All right, setting up system files. We're kind of rolling into the end of our discussion. I'm not going to keep you guys the whole hour, I promise. So system files are unique, and that's because they cannot be saved out as .rfa files. In fact, there are many classes of Revit things that cannot be saved out and sort of discreetly packaged. Some of these are going to include your drafting view details. That's a big deal, because standard drafting views, if you've got EPDM roof system and you've got 15 different details showing everything from the curb to the roof penetration detail to the parapet detail, how the roofing system rolls up the side of that wall, all of that is provided by the manufacturer. And so, or it could be, and so you can download that content from them. And if you had a content management solution, then you could have it discreetly catalog those system files. Otherwise, you need to put those into, and I'm going to get more to this point later, you have to put those in a container project. If you don't do that work, then you're just leaving them in whatever project it came in. And that's the worst case scenario. And sadly, that's what most people are doing, is no curation. They're doing it in their project. And if you can find it, good for you, but we're leaving it in the past. So some of the things that you cannot save out as RFA files on your network: drafting views, we just talked about that; schedules, walls, that's a big one; floors, ceilings, roofs, stairs. You ever wonder why you keep using crummy stairs? Why won't somebody create some great stairs and make them available for me? Railings, ramps, storefront, curtain wall mullions. None of that can be saved as James's neat stair.rfa. Now, if you have a content management solution like Hive, then it does have the ability to discreetly save out system files for you so that you don't have to create a container project. Don't put all that content in your template file. I shouldn't have to say this, but man, I have to say this quite a lot. We talk with people about building templates for them, reviewing their templates, streamlining their templates. And there are a lot of people that put all 78 walls that they use into their Revit template, and all of their jobs start with that. And nobody knows how to find the correct wall type because there's so many to choose from. What goes in your Revit template file is only your almost certain to be used families. So you only put in your 4 7/8 inch, half inch or 5/8 inch chipboard on metal stud wall. That goes in your template because you use that almost certainly. That's what goes in there, not all of the 77 other wall types that you utilize. You can create a container project. Normally, this is one container project if a firm does it. Sometimes it's done by asset. For instance, if you look up here, walls is one category. That's a big one right there. They might create walls.rvt. And if you open that up, there are 78 walls in different clusters. All the brick wall, brick veneer are over here. My interior are on this side, my exterior are on that side. But they've clumped them typically spatially according to their similarities. But here's the kicker: it made sense to who organized it. It doesn't to anybody that's new or anybody that hasn't been looking at it and working with that for a year. And they still, even if they understand the organization of it, they have to click on each one and find out what the differentiating quality is of that wall to the one next to it. Okay, this one only has that sweep on one side. Okay, that's not the one I want. And so there is still an interrogation process that happens when they visit the container project that is inefficient. But if you want to create a container project that's better than leaving it in a past project, it's still not as good as the content management solution, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in just a moment. But if you want to create a container project, you can pull from it, and you should this way, which is to open up your new project that needs the content. You go to View, Insert from File, Insert Views from File, and that will let you get the standard, drafting details or whatever view has been created inside of that. You can also simply copy and paste, in the case of walls, that content into your current project. If you were trying to get views from a container project, the Plan C way to do that is to go to Manage Transfer Project Standards. The reason that's Plan C is because it's going to move every one of that thing into your new project. So you'll have a lot of purging and deleting to do if you transfer project standards to push the content over. Lastly, I wish I could spend more time talking about this one. If you utilize a CMS product, you might look at a Unify or an Avail. We would obviously recommend CTC Software's Hive. We are a reseller of that product. I'm personally happy if you use any content management solution, because it's way better than all of the other best practice solutions that we've talked about so far. They tend to not be expensive. And what they provide to you, if you look at the money that's flying out the window, it's ridiculous, the amount of money being lost through doing nothing or doing little versus the cost of a software that's a content management solution that not only helps you consolidate your files in one place, to enact a QA/QC process on those files and then choose when they're hosted. But it's also got rating systems built into it. It has the ability for me to request content. So if I'm not a Revit Jedi, but I need a 6-panel residential door and we don't have one, or I don't see it in Hive, I can place a request for that. And then the person who is in charge, or is the manager of that particular library, gets an email with that request. I could also place a request where I say, here, I found the 6-panel door. Can you test it? Use our QA/QC process. And then when it's ready, let me know. And then they can send it to me or post it right on Hive as soon as it has gone through the QA/QC process. So Hive also helps in the dissemination of the content. It not only centralizes it, it's cloud hosted, or it can be, it should be. And by default, it is pulled from the cloud. So people could work from home and have access to all of the content that the firm has without having to sort of jump through some VPN hoops to be able to get there. If you couple that with something like a BIM 360 design, where you're working in the cloud in the project, and you've got your content available through Hive and in the cloud, now you are really connected. You've got access to everything. And as you update it into your project, everybody's work is being updated at once without use of VPN or virtual systems or any of that. So just wanted to make sure that you guys take a look at that. There are other workflows, certainly lots of other workflows that we get into. We've probably only touched on about 1/3 of the content that's in that white paper. It gets a lot more procedural in recommending you could do this. This is the good, better, best kind of way to approach this. And then it also gets into specific software recommendations with screenshots, so that you guys can look into, deduplication software is just one thing, renaming software, being able to handle things in batch is a really big deal. And so I want to encourage you guys to take a look at that paper. I wish it was available today. I'd just say go there, but it's going to be around March 3rd that comes out. In conclusion, we've detailed what the problem is. I apologize for the drama that I've added to it, but most people are unaware of just how big of a problem that is. And we need to make that very clear to leadership, the cost to the firm. We also discussed the necessary involvement of leadership. Don't just make this a pet project of yours. If you're in leadership, don't just think your Revit Jedi is going to save the day. They're going to try, and it's it's going to peter out. They may not know it yet, but I happen to know that doing things just in your own time as a pet project, it almost never yields a good result. And if it did, they disengaged from other Revit projects that need their Revit mind. We also talked about how to build your library, and later we got into the harvesting too. And then we hopefully didn't introduce the idea of a QA QC process, but gave you guys some ideas of what you need to add to your QA QC process. If you guys have a QA QC process, I want to encourage you to go ahead and start typing something up in the chat as far as things that you have found successful in ensuring the quality. If you're in that 10% of firms that kind of have their act together, we'd love to hear from you. I'll kind of read what your thoughts are on that. And if you've kind of generated some questions during this, you can start thinking about those for the chat as well. And then also we discussed a couple of workflows for dealing with system files, the container project, content management solution, and ways to save out to those solutions. All right, so this concludes our webinar, Curating a Neglected Revit Family Library. I don't know why I chose a different name than the white paper itself, but around March 3rd, you guys will be able to visit that link that you see down. Well, it's not a link, but that address that you see there to be able to download how to unshamble your Revit library. That will help you guys put together your game plan. And I've spent a few months researching that, putting together my thoughts on the best order and the successes that I have seen with other firms and being able to sort of unshamble their Revit libraries. And I've also put in our processes that ATG does on contract for firms. We've bid jobs to help people unshamble their libraries where, I mean, we had to write a very open-ended scope of work because typically those firms don't even know how many files they have. It's like, how do you write a scope for something where, I'm sorry, we should know that, but we don't even know where all the content is yet. But we're still able to get in there and help them and also educate them while we're helping them on that. All right, so I'm gonna take a minute and I encourage you guys to type in if you've got comments on things that you've been able to do that are successful. And I'm also gonna be looking for questions first here though. Also in chat, there is a link to the YouTube for this. So just be aware of that you guys are able to take someone in your firm and say, hey, check out this video later. In fact, you're maybe hearing it now on YouTube for the first time. Ooh, sorry, I'm gonna have to take a minute here and skim here for myself. Okay. Oh yeah, comparing similar families is a challenge. Yeah, so Brian, there is a challenge in taking iterated families because man, if someone else did that, even if you do it, it's hard to keep it straight. When I do it, I tend to name them with an iteration number. Like if I started with outdoor lantern, then if I make changes to it, I might call it outdoor lantern 2. If I didn't do it with the naming, I can also check the Windows properties and see it when it was last modified. So that's not going to be when it was last looked at or opened. So that's a couple of things that I'll do that are a light lift, Brian, just to evaluate which one's the old one. But you know, if you've got hundreds of them, you just throw away the old ones. If you've got a handful, then you might actually open them and investigate it yourself. If you want to investigate it and you want to automate that family checker by CTC is able to perform an analysis of what is missing in one versus what is missing in another. Well, you'd have to compare the results and see which one hit more flags. And then that would sort of tell you which one's in better shape. Okay. Jose says that they have a BIM QA/QC in place. That's awesome to hear. He likes the idea of having a project BIM QA/QC. Yeah, normally a BIM kickoff meeting is going to not just say, you know, here's how we work together as consultants. Here is the LOD that we expect on this project for the different categories. It should also outline the process of harvesting families into folders for future use. That may not be a discussion that you have with your consultants as well. You're certainly not harvesting their stuff, I hope, but you do need to talk with your team, either at your own project kickoff internally, or you need to have it written into your BIM documentation what the standard operating procedure needs to be on every project. Don't put that on your Revit Jedi. They can't come in behind everybody and find the neat stuff for themselves. They won't do it. If they could do it, they've got more profitable things to be doing. So that's one of those that's sort of inarguably at the project manager level, to make sure that they are looking back, and because really only they know their project well enough to say these are the quality families from this. All right, Dania was asking, there's a link in the chat, not in the QA portion, that has the link to the YouTube video, which is probably going to, I would guess, be hosted tomorrow. The white paper, unfortunately, you can see the link on screen. That's going to be around March 3rd. Right. Family processor. Dania, which link are you after? Are you wanting the YouTube video or the white paper? Because they're in two different spots. YouTube, okay. Right, so the YouTube link isn't, oh, it's to the panelists. Now I see. All right, so let me copy this and then I will paste it to attendees and panelists. Thanks for bringing that to my attention here. All right, can you guys see that now? Awesome. Yeah, you know what, you guys, and this is just me puffing my chest, there's a lot of content on there. And if you look at other resellers, I mean, we are putting a tremendous amount of content on there. We've got about 40 people, 40 of us contributing to that channel. And so there is new content. There's, gosh, 5 or 6 pieces of content being added per week. So I would recommend you decide if you want to subscribe to it. But if you go to if you just Google YouTube ATG USA, you'll end up on our site. And this video, as well as several others that are going to help you out, are going to be there. It's going to be a great source for you in the future, not just on this big deal topic here. So I don't see any comments about things that people have been able to do, except for, Jose was mentioning their QA QC process has been very helpful to them. That kind of matches up here. About 10% of us have a story to say, yeah, you should do it. The other 90% of us are just kind of like, I know I should do it. How can one find the time? So the trick here is, again, and the biggest part of this discussion is facing the problem, recognizing there's a problem and putting a dollar sign to that, and then getting it recognized as a project. And then you need to have the game plan. And that's where the white paper and such can help you guys. Let's see, Dania has written some Dynamo to add and set parameters. Yeah. Yeah, and she also mentions there is a CTC. There's actually a couple of CTC tools for pumping shared parameters into content. I kind of got to caution you about that too, though, because there's some firms that think, well, or they'll turn their users loose. Okay, you guys go to Revit City or wherever you want to go, grab the content, but at least use this CTC parameter jammer and push those shared parameters to it. That is not a curated family. That is a family that's been jammed. That's why they call it parameter jammer. It's just simply done one act of curation of making sure it will schedule with those shared parameters. There's obviously, and you guys probably know Revit pretty well, there's a lot of work that should go into curation even beyond that. So don't just turn your users loose to grab content and sort of fix it. You guys need to have a really good QA/QC process. Yeah. Yeah, good, Dania, that you guys are still cleaning the families before they come in. It is, again, it's maybe 10 to 20% of firms will actually harvest files in a meaningful way. They're not doing a good job of hosting them, but they're getting them. And so that number opens up to more like 20% of firms are doing that. So I'm glad to see that you guys are have a process for getting them. Most firms, it's just accidental that they build a library. And there's so much profitability beyond closing the window where we're wasting time trying to find families. We're distributing them very well, in an organized way. But we're also, once you get that organization in place, like I mentioned, your family's going to grow very, very huge. Donnie she's got it locked down, the only one who can post in Hive. You can set it up that way. If you want to be the only one that can add to the content, normally what we advise for people to do is to have a Hive admin who is capable of appointing other admins. And if you have the expertise in your firm across, several brains, then you would look to see what people are good at curating. In a lot of cases, you've got some older architects, I could speak to that industry, that are very knowledgeable in what the details should be. And so you might have a partner in the firm or someone who deals with details a lot, in charge really of only the detail library. But you might have people that are great at building Revit families in charge of several of those categories of objects. Also, you end up having people that are good at delivering a certain kind of project. We were just talking to a customer that delivers a lot of high-end commercial car washes, and that's very specialized content. And if you've got project managers that have specialized knowledge, they're going to be way better at curating that set of files. And so you don't just want to take someone who's nifty in Revit and say, okay, you're the admin of all these libraries. You want to put your content experts in charge of those Hive libraries, and that's going to help you have the best success with using your whole team. And don't ever just look to one person and say, well, they're the only person that knows Revit, so they're the only one who can do it. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. I love the engagement. Everybody is still on. So I'll leave you with a meme here too at the end. I hope that this discussion's motivated you guys to begin the process. If you haven't already begun, you still need a plan. Shamelessly, I still want to remind you about the white paper that's going to be published around March 3rd. In that paper, you're going to find more details on the order and the processes that I recommend, as well as some alternative strategies that the industry is utilizing to mitigate the gross inefficiencies that we have with disorganized piles of families. If you guys implement a strategy from the paper and you start to see success, please send a link to your consultants and your colleagues later so that they can sort of have that same success in following that process outlined in the paper. I'm James Hughes. Remember, if you downloaded some content from Revit City and it needs to be gotten rid of, thank it for bringing you years of enjoyment before deleting it. Until next time, goodbye.